Unveiling the Untold. 10 D-Day Facts They Don't Teach in School. On June 6, 1944, a pivotal moment in World War II unfolded as Allied forces launched an invasion in the Normandy region of France. This offensive marked the commencement of a grueling campaign aimed at liberating Western Europe from the grip of Nazi occupation. It was a day of immense sacrifice and courage, where many American and Allied soldiers paid the ultimate price. This historic event became known as D-Day, signifying the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. Less than a year later, on May 7, 1945, the Third Reich acknowledged an unconditional surrender, bringing an end to hostilities. D-Day, therefore, remains a sacred date in Normandy, consecrated soil, for those who lost loved ones in World War II and for those who hold deep respect for the sacrifices made by those brave men. In this compilation, we will explore D-Day from a distinctive perspective. While numerous accounts narrate the stories of the valiant men who stormed the beaches, facing a barrage of Nazi fire from elevated turrets, there are lesser-known facets of this momentous day. Here are 10 obscure facts about D-Day and the gallant men who executed this monumental campaign. Number 10. The planning took years. D-Day, which occurred in June 1944, had been a topic of strategic contemplation in Europe since the very inception of World War II. The looming specter of Adolf Hitler's dominance in Nazi Germany and his westward aggression fueled a grave concern. Preventing the Nazis from extending their control across all of Europe, and particularly averting the peril of a Nazi invasion on the British Isles, was of paramount importance. Winston Churchill, recognizing the gravity of the situation, had resolved to take action early on. As early as October 1941, Churchill engaged in correspondence with Captain Lord Louis Mountbatten, exploring the possibility of an Allied land invasion on the European continent. Churchill underscored the imperative need to confront Hitler's forces on land, stating, "Unless we can go on land and fight Hitler and beat his forces on land, we shall never win this war." Mountbatten acknowledged the wisdom of this approach, but the challenges ahead were nothing short of daunting. In April 1943, Churchill and his counterparts instructed another British military leader, Lieutenant General Sir Frederick Morgan, to prepare the nation's soldiers for a large-scale assault on the European continent. In the ensuing months, the United States became a key participant. In December 1943, President Franklin D. Roosevelt traveled to Tunis, Tunisia, for a critical meeting with then-General Dwight D. Eisenhower. During this meeting, FDR left no room for ambiguity, instructing Eisenhower to lead the American forces and their allies in an invasion of Nazi-controlled territories in France and other parts of Western Europe. With this directive, Eisenhower embarked on the arduous task of coordinating the multifaceted landings that would ultimately transpire in Normandy. The true battle lay ahead, but the meticulous planning for D-Day had already consumed nearly 3 years of covert and deliberate coordination. Number 9. Be a bigot. Wait, what? When the time came to strategize and coordinate D-Day, all matters related to the operation fell under the classified designation, Bigot. Now, don't let the term bigot in its modern sense mislead you, as it had an entirely different connotation. In fact, Bigot was an acronym, standing for British Invasion of German-Occupied Territory. Unfortunately, the resulting spelling of the acronym wasn't particularly favorable, but that was of little concern to those involved in the operation's planning. For the planners of D-Day, the main worry was ensuring that no information would fall into the hands of the Germans through spies or leaks. Consequently, Bigot swiftly became the highest level of classification for all matters pertaining to World War II. Surpassing even top secret, documents related to Bigot were accessible only to the most trusted leaders among the Allies. Among the myriad messages relayed through the Bigot network, one crucial communication arrived at the 11th hour, a request for a delay. Originally scheduled for June 5, 1944, D-Day faced an initial setback due to adverse weather conditions. Allied leaders recognized that storming the beaches amidst heavy rain and aerial gunfire would be exceptionally challenging. Counting on more favorable conditions on June 6, personnel working under FDR and Churchill used the Bigot network to postpone the operation by 24 hours. Number 8. Why is it called D-Day? The term D-Day was, in fact, a phrase frequently used by military organizations in the United States and around the world to designate the initiation of an operation. In this context, the D represents day, signifying the day when the event is slated to occur. Thus, calling it D-Day may seem somewhat redundant, a characteristic that might prompt a few veterans to quip. That's the military for you. Setting aside the redundancy, it's important to note that in 1944, the term D-Day did not carry the historical significance it holds for us today, especially among history enthusiasts. It was employed to describe the day of attack in various military endeavors, not limited to the invasion of the Normandy beaches. However, for the specific Allied assault on Nazi strongholds on those French shores, a more specific name was employed: Operation Overlord. This was the designation military officials used during the planning and execution of the invasion. It's only in retrospect, years later, that we now commonly refer to it as D-Day. Through this lens, we can reflect upon the distinct and formidable sacrifices made by the Allied soldiers on that initial and exceedingly harrowing day of the invasion. Number 7. A truly worldwide affair. When the average history enthusiast envisions the Allied forces who participated in the momentous D-Day operation, the immediate associations are typically American and British troops. Additionally, the contributions of former British colonies like Canada and Australia often come to mind. Moreover, war-torn Western European nations such as France, Belgium, and the Netherlands were eager to contribute as well. However, the reality is more expansive and diverse. D-Day witnessed a substantial presence of soldiers hailing from a multitude of nations spanning the globe. These nations included Central European territories like Czechoslovakia, Northern European outliers such as Norway, Mediterranean participants like Greece, Eastern European countries, including Poland, and even soldiers from the South Pacific Ocean, who traveled from as far as New Zealand. Notably, even the small nation of Luxembourg extended its support. As if this international coalition were not already remarkable, soldiers from the former British colony known as Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, were also part of the effort. This global endeavor to defeat the Axis powers, including the Nazis, Mussolini's Italians, and the Japanese, was a testament to the unity of nations. The success of D-Day hinged on the naval, air, and ground support provided by every nation involved. Even with the combined forces of these nations, there were moments when it seemed almost insurmountable to push back the formidable adversary that was Hitler from the shores of Europe. Number 6. Hitler wanted a wall, too. While Winston Churchill, FDR, and Allied leaders diligently prepared for D-Day, their counterparts in the Nazi regime were equally engaged in an extensive project. Long before the fateful 1944 landings, Hitler had instructed his subordinates to construct a formidable Atlantic wall along the coastlines of France and Western Europe. Extending from the northern reaches of Norway to the southern borders of Spain, this ambitious undertaking involved the erection of turrets and various defenses. Hitler's motives were not rooted in mere occupation, as he foresaw an eventual Allied incursion into Western Europe. To thwart these efforts, he ordered the creation of walls, barriers, and other ostensibly impenetrable defenses. The result was a continuous fortification spanning nearly 1,700 miles, 2,736 kilometers, along Europe's western coast. Hitler had even grander aspirations, aiming for a 2,400-mile-long, 3,862-kilometer defense stretching from the Norwegian coast to the southern tip of Spain. Interestingly, a significant portion of Hitler's Atlantic Wall remains intact to this day. Many of the concrete turret defenses constructed by the Nazis still stand, either fully or partially preserved in the modern era. Alongside these turrets, other anti-landing obstacles can be found along the extensive, rugged Atlantic coast of Europe. In this way, history endures, serving as a somber reminder of the harrowing events that preceded our time. Number 5. Doing the difficult thing. The beaches of Normandy presented one of the most challenging locations for the Allied invasion during World War II. It might seem counterintuitive, but this difficulty and accessibility was precisely what made it the ideal choice. The Nazis had meticulously surveyed the entire coastline, evaluating potential invasion points, and had concluded that Normandy was the least likely location for an Allied assault. This assessment was based on several strategic factors. Normandy's coast was distinguished by rocky outcroppings that naturally provided the Nazis with a defensible position overlooking the beaches. Moreover, Normandy represented one of the widest stretches to cross over the English Channel. There was no nearby port that could serve as a logistical base for the Allies to set up operations. The Nazis, as a result, assumed that the Allies would opt for a different landing site. They focused their fortifications and defenses more intently on places like Pas de Calais, which possessed a readily available port and was the shortest distance from Great Britain through the English Channel. However, the Allies deliberately chose Normandy as their invasion point, precisely because it defied the expectations of the Nazis. They recognized that the element of surprise was crucial. By launching the attack at Normandy, they anticipated encountering a less fortified segment of the Nazi defense apparatus. Furthermore, the Normandy beaches were within the range of air cover provided by British pilots, a significant advantage. To address the port issue, the Allies devised an ingenious solution: the construction of two artificial harbors, known as mulberries. These artificial ports enabled them to transport thousands of tons of vehicles, ammunition, and supplies daily during the beach assault. In essence, the imperfections of Normandy as a potential invasion location made it the perfect choice. The unexpected nature of the Allied assault caught the Nazis off guard, and this strategic decision played a pivotal role in the success of the historic event. Number 4. Faking the news. The phenomenon of fake news has garnered significant attention in recent years, particularly in the digital age. However, it's crucial to recognize that misinformation, propaganda, and deceit have been employed for many decades. In the lead-up to D-Day, the Allies utilized the power of disinformation to their advantage, aiming to divert Hitler's attention from the impending invasion. This elaborate misinformation campaign was dubbed Operation Bodyguard, and it was in motion for an entire year prior to the execution of the D-Day invasion. The last couple of months leading up to D-Day were particularly frenzied, with the Allies deliberately inundating the Nazi intelligence apparatus with a deluge of contradictory information. The objective was to create such a complex and confusing landscape that the German forces would be unable to discern the actual invasion plans. To achieve this, the Allies deployed multiple double-agent spies who disseminated misleading information. Operating as deceptive informants with erroneous data, they communicated false details regarding the invasion's timing, methods, and locations. The Allies also employed fabricated plans, established sham military camps, and transmitted encrypted radio messages that were ultimately devoid of actual meaning, all intended to mislead the German forces. On the very day of the invasion, the Allies executed a final deception. Just hours before the Normandy landings, Allied bombers conducted a high-altitude bombing raid on the city of Calais, France. This last-minute ruse was designed to convince the Germans that the Allies were intending to invade Calais, a more logical choice. In reality, Churchill, FDR, and their teams had selected Normandy for the invasion, and the deployment of fake news played a pivotal role in catching the Germans off guard during the beach assault. Number 3. First by air, not by sea. When we reflect on D-Day, the iconic image that often comes to mind is the courageous Allied troops disembarking from boats onto the shores of Normandy, facing relentless Nazi fire, and struggling to make their way from the water onto the beach. However, a less widely known fact is that before the sea landings, there was an essential air assault that took place. Hours prior to the boats arriving at Normandy, a joint force of British and American airborne troops executed landings deep behind German lines, well inland from the beach. Their primary objective was to locate and secure the Caen Canal Bridge, situated a few miles inland from the Normandy beaches. The mission was clear: capture the area around the bridge and maintain control for the Allies. This strategic move aimed to prevent the Nazis from sending reinforcements and establishing a supply line while the beach battle raged on. The Caen Canal Bridge held immense significance, as it represented the sole crossing point over the Orne River and the Caen Canal between two crucial villages in the region, Ranville and Bénouville. Therefore, securing this bridge and the surrounding hamlets became the primary mission for the 6th British Airborne Division and their American counterparts. The airborne assaults commenced just after midnight on June 6 and continued throughout the day. Similar to the troops who landed on the beach, the airborne units faced a grueling and perilous ordeal, but they ultimately succeeded in their mission. Today, the bridge is known as the Pegasus Bridge. Annually, both locals and tourists gather at the site to commemorate and reenact the events, paying tribute to the paratroopers who bravely descended from the skies in the dead of night. Their crucial role as the first to engage the enemy on the front lines at the outset of the Normandy assault should never be forgotten. Number 2. Landing via Louisiana. One critical element that significantly aided the Allied troops during the beach landings on D-Day were the Higgins boats. These innovative vessels were the brainchild of Andrew Higgins, a lumber business owner and former National Guard infantry officer residing in the swampy regions of Louisiana both before and during World War II. His lumber operations often involved extracting trees from the challenging and shallow waters of these swampy areas, and Higgins encountered continuous difficulties with the boats he used for this purpose. Frustrated by the inadequacy of available boats, Higgins embarked on a mission to design a boat that could effectively navigate Louisiana's challenging swamp terrain. Several years prior to the outbreak of World War II, he began working on a new boat design. Eventually, he succeeded in creating a practical and functional boat that could handle the demands of hauling lumber in the Louisiana swamps. Initially, Higgins intended to turn this boat design into a side business. However, he faced a significant obstacle: he couldn't sell his boats. Despite his persistent efforts, the boats remained unsold for a considerable period. Just as he was on the verge of giving up, the federal government stepped in. They required boats for amphibious wartime operations and placed an order for 20,000 of them. Once modified for the military's specific needs, these boats became known as Landing Craft Vehicle and Personnel, LCVP, ships, and they perfectly fulfilled the military's requirements. Higgins' boats played a central role throughout World War II, used in various theaters of operation, including Italy, North Africa, the South Pacific Islands, and notably during the Normandy landings on D-Day. They revolutionized the way the war was waged. Previously, the Navy had to assault well-fortified ports to establish a logistical presence and disembark troops. However, with Higgins' unique boats, they could land directly on open beaches, bypass the strongest enemy fortifications, and breach enemy lines at a less fortified location. This tactic forced defending armies to disperse their forces more thinly to cover a larger area, strategically impacting the course of the war. Number 1. Anne Frank celebrated it. Even the news of the momentous Normandy invasion reached the ears of Anne Frank, who, at the time, was hiding with her family in a cramped attic in Amsterdam, hoping to evade the Nazi searches for Jewish people. Their secret refuge was a place of fear and uncertainty, but on June 6, around noon, they received news through a BBC radio report that D-Day had begun in Western Europe. Upon hearing this, Anne, filled with jubilation at the prospect of liberation from the harsh grip of Nazi occupation, immediately turned to her diary to express her thoughts. In her youthful yet insightful prose, she pondered, is this truly the beginning of the long-awaited liberation? The liberation we've spoken of so much, which still seems too good, too much like a fairy tale to ever come true? Will this year, 1944, bring us victory? We do not yet know, but where there is hope, there is life. It fills us with renewed courage and strength. Anne understood that the mere initiation of D-Day did not guarantee her family's rescue from Nazi persecution. It would take time for the Allies to push the Nazis out of Amsterdam and beyond. Tragically, their hopes would remain unfulfilled. Almost precisely 2 months later, Anne and her family were discovered by the Nazi authorities in their hiding place. Anne perished in 1945 before the Allies could arrive to liberate her concentration camp from Nazi tyranny.